All right, welcome. This is the last lecture for 101 and 201 this year, and we're talking about the growth strategies, structural change in the Philippines. This wraps up chapter 7 and 8, and as before, we want to really think about the Philippine experience in the light of all of the theories that we have been learning. Okay, so first, let's talk about the growth rates from the solo model. So here we have table 8-1, which I recommend you all to review. It is one of the most important tables in chapter 7 and 8. And it gives you the long run steady state growth. And there's a focus really in 7 and 8 on the long run steady state. K star in the book, Y star happens to be the long run capital per effective labor. And the full solo model is the one featured in chapter 8 when you include population growth and effective technological growth into the model. But what we sort of neglected to explain, or glossed over, I should say, is that even before K reaches K star, their Y is growing. And in fact, the growth of GDP would be larger, okay, the further K is to K star or Y is to Y star. So you can see this clearest in the capital accumulation equation, which gives the speed of growth of Y, and that which is larger, the larger the delta K is. So here's the delta K, which should be familiar. It's investment minus break-even investment. The smaller the K is, the larger this thing will be. And the larger this thing will be, the faster the growth rate, and it will basically slow down until it reaches delta small k is equal to 0. And that is when you reach the steady state, which will give you, which you can refer to table 8-1 for the long run steady state growth rates. So specifically, so let's talk about in the steady state, K is equal to K star and delta K is 0. So the growth of Y equals Y over EL is 0. But Y grows at exactly N plus G. And K also grows at N plus G. That's net of depreciation. So remember, every period, K goes away by delta. But the total growth, the total investment, which is here, right? Total addition, the gross additions, I should say, the gross additions to capital includes that depreciation. And this is the net growth in K, right? Now, when K is less than K star, delta K is greater than 0, and it grows even faster than the steady state N plus G. So what I wanted to do was to maybe show that on the white screen. If we do have a white screen, whiteboard, do we have a whiteboard? Annotate? Not really. Wait, I know. Whiteboard, there you go. So here's our whiteboard. We can draw, right? Here's our K here. And here's your, let's do this at N plus G plus delta. K, right? And then here, correct? You will get something like that, right? And this will be, of course, SF of K, right? And the difference here will be, the difference between the two will affect K, right? Delta K. And what we're saying here is that if this is K star here, right? The farther away your K is, say your K is way out here. So the further the distance between K, which you started with, and the K that will you end up, okay, the faster the growth will be, right? And as you go to the right, as K moves to the right here, it slows down, and it slows down until it goes to the long run growth or long run speed. All right. So that's what this is saying. So we have this one. All right. So in fact, we can consider the effect of increasing the savings rate. From an increase in S, this will increase the distance of K in the long run, K star, right? It will change the K star, right? So that means the increase distance. And therefore, there will be an increase in the growth rate temporarily to be more than N plus G until you reach the long run and steady state where it will return to N plus G. In the long run, though, there will be a change in the level. So because S affects small k, therefore it will affect Y, and it will affect Y over L. Both of those things will be higher given a higher savings rate. All right. Of course, we should also note that immediately upon the increase in the savings rate, because K has not had a chance to move yet, Y is therefore constant. Consumption will go down, okay, and then investment will go up, right? Immediately. All right, what else? Okay, so everything that we've been talking about, the further away from K star you are, the faster you grow. This implies a convergence, right, of rich and poor countries. Okay, and we can go back. Well, if I can just go back here to the whiteboard that we've been using, that this convergence, this gap between this and this, really comes from the fact that MPK is diminishing, that there's a marginal, diminishing marginal returns to capital. Implies temporary growth spread from an increase in S. And it comes straight from the shape of S of F of K, right? The shape of S of F of K is that of increasing in K, but diminishing. Every time you increase K, the change in small y will be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay. So we talk about, we introduced Balisacan Mapa et al. In their paper, and they talk about catch up amongst Philippine regions. And they do confirm the prediction of the solo model. And that provinces that are poor catch up to provinces that are rich. And this is just an expression from their paper saying exactly what we've been saying. This alpha here is the slope of, well, it's alpha is marginal MPK itself, right? And then what else? Log and the growth in Y is depends on the distance between Y star, the ultimate to steady state, and where you are currently. So let's talk about their findings. So in Balisacan Mapa, the initial income coefficient is -3, and this is the speed of convergence. The convergence of is 3% per year. Okay, so poor countries with a smaller GDP will converge to the richer provinces at the rate of 3%. Okay, so you might think that's fast, but actually, if you think about it in terms of the rule of 70, right? So here's the rule of 70, which will answer the question, how long will it take to reach half the distance between the initial income to the long run income? And here, if it's 3%, it's 23 years, and that's based on the rule of 70, wherein 70 divided by 3, right? And that's approximately equal to 23. Okay. So that's the rule of 70. We can derive that, but we don't necessarily have to derive it. But essentially, if one gives you the rate of convergence, you can easily get the half-life. It's called the half-life. How long will it take to reach the current initial income to half the gap of that initial income and the long run? And that's 23 years. So that's pretty long, actually. That's pretty long, right? International evidence, convergence across countries indicates a convergence value of 2, which means that the half-life is even longer than at 35 years. So note that this is geometric. So it's kind of like, if you remember the hare versus the turtle, I think, right? Wherein the hare, no, I think it's Zeno, right? I think it's Zeno, the legend of Zeno, where Zeno can get to half per second, can half the distance every second, but then he will never essentially reach the end of the race because every time it's half and then three-fourths and then uh, one-fourth of the one half of the remaining one-fourth, which is one half of one-fourth, it's 1/8, and so on and so on. You get closer, but you'll never actually get there. And the half-life is always 35 years, right? So it's pretty long, right? And again, convergence means that you're never actually going to get there because of the geometric argument. Okay, so given this length of time, there's been deep interest in increasing growth, spurring even further growth, right? Of course, hoping to change the standards of living dramatically in a generation. And in fact, that's happened. The East Asian tigers, China, Vietnam, all of those are successful examples where within a generation of 40 to 50 years, living standards dramatically increased. And we saw also the data in class when we were looking at the data, right? Okay. All right, so we recall that in the long run, what's important for output per worker is the efficiency of labor or technological progress. So the idea of spurring additional growth really is about how to increase the level of technological progress or efficiency of labor or technological progress generally. So there has been work from an economics point of view on what can affect this on a sustained basis. So you can expand capital to that of human capital or developing skilled labor that will improve the efficiency of labor. Expanding investment in public capital and infrastructure, it will tend to also increase the productivity of people in a country. Industrial policy, which I wish we had more time, but is basically looking at industries or subsidizing or helping industries expand, particularly industries with externalities such as learning by doing or a knowledge spillover externality or some other demand or externality wherein the more people who are doing it or producing it, the lower the costs are or the higher the value is. That is a kind of policy or industry that we would like, because those kinds of industries would tend to also have economies of scale and would tend to employ a lot and would produce a lot and would add value added to the economy. And then the right institutions and the right incentives, quality institutions, governance, protection, limiting corruption, encouraging competition, lowering red tape. All of these will tend to raise productivity and raise long-run growth rates. So we'll skip structural transformation for now. And we'll jump also now to trade, which has been one of the reasons why one of the ways in which we hope to increase that productivity per worker, right? So trade has been been seen to be a way to increase income and economic growth, because from a theoretical point of view, it encourages this efficient allocation of inputs within countries, which will raise the productivity of a country, right? So that's the whole idea, but about why this sort of thing is sought after is quite important. And empirical work has shown, and you can look at ManQ, there's a sidebar on trade in the growth chapters, wherein more open economies, such as measuring it in terms of trade to GDP, raises income per person. And there have been instances where opening to trade from a relatively closed situation has created subsequent strong economic growth, like Vietnam in the early 80s, Japan opened, etc. So now, let's talk a little bit about the Philippines and developing countries and how they thought of sort of understanding trade to develop their own economies and improve productivity per worker, right? So the first thing that they wanted to do was import substitution. And this was the policy mainly for most of the 20th century after the war for many developing countries, including the Philippines. So in import substitution, This is a form of structural change, which again, we will discuss in a moment, which forces Philippine industry through regulations or border tariffs or other regulations to encourage replacing imports with domestically produced manufacturers. So you can imagine tariffs being part of that. You, instead of importing manufacturers, you have a tariff to discourage that. And instead of buying from abroad, you will encourage domestic production of those manufacturers. It's hoped that manufacturing will create these large domestic industries, and the larger it is, that means we'll take advantage of economies of scale and will allow us to go down the average cost curve. Okay, a problem is that import substitution has always been accompanied by balance of payments concerns. So in the Philippines, particularly, we focused on that. There's been a lot of problems with the availability of foreign exchange and the ability to import goods, right? And you want to limit imports precisely to limit or to save on foreign exchange, which will allow you to defend your exchange rate. Okay, and in case it's unclear, the Philippines would like to defend the exchange rate precisely because it wants to have this stable rate at which it can import products from abroad. So all of these things are tied together, right? So you could do import substitution to limit imports, to defend the nominal exchange rates, will allow you to do import substitution. To import at a good price what you cannot basically produce domestically still, despite import substitution. Hence, the policy itself of import substitution industrialization was at times a secondary concern to these BOP issues. Another concern is that these industries that were encouraged even more imports. Okay, like we produced intermediate packing steps, which needed imports of capital and intermediate goods, and it failed to develop the rest of the supply chain. The other problem is that the Philippine market is not large enough to make economies of scale of import substitution work. So in many countries like the United States, the domestic market is large enough so that a domestic firm that focuses on the domestic market will enjoy enough economies of scale to enjoy lower prices, right? So broadly speaking, import substitution was not able to help the Philippines increase its efficiency output per capita, right? Inspired by the successful experiences in East Asia, and this one might make even more sense than ISI, right? As I'll explain it later, the Philippines tried to adopt export-led development or export promotion. So in the IS period, the import substitution period, the export pattern of the country to export primary goods has been established. This time, by promoting manufacturing exports, the benefits include, notice the similarity of the arguments with ISI. So we're participating in trade, especially export production and promotion, exposes the country to the latest, most advanced production and techniques, learning by doing, which will hopefully lower your average cost. Yeah. A lot of these have a BOP benefit because if you export, you earn foreign exchange, like we discussed in our BOP chapter. If you have a current account surplus, that means you're accumulating foreign exchange. And in the language of ManQ, you're having a net output. What's that? CA is net outflow of capital, correct? Now, according to these models, the investment savings gap, foreign exchange gap are major obstacles to growth and development. Foreign exchange is necessary for development. Right? Felipe also argues that export-led strategies allow the expansion of aggregate demand without inflationary pressure. So that's important because if demand is growing domestically, prices will tend to grow up domestically. But if you're feeding a foreign demand, then you are enjoying the growth in Y without the expansionary demand, as much inflationary pressure domestically, because it's really foreign demand that's going up. Okay. This is also partly due to the resulting real appreciation of the currency as a result of large export earnings, which tames inflation and allows real wages to rise. So recall that if you're earning dollars, then at some point those dollars were turned into pesos, okay, because of domestic use, and that will in turn increase the demand for pesos, right, which will result in the real appreciation of the Philippine peso. Broadly speaking, the Philippines' experience in export-led growth, export promotion, has been less successful than our neighbors. As you can see here, the growth rates in South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and all of these are basically essentially bigger than that of the Philippines, right? If you can look at these numbers. In fact, even all of the other countries basically are dwarfed by PRC. So there are a few reasons why. In this one, Alburo cites the fact that our export promotion was half-baked. We were in between IS and export promotion, and we weren't able to really align our regulations to focus truly on export promotion. Other factors that are included in his work were infrastructure, generally, roads, electricity prices, or infrastructure and power generation. The lack of FDI, right, which is required for domestic and additional domestic investment, which is crucial for capital accumulation and knowledge spillovers, and the overvalued currency, which would make it more difficult for exports to grow. And in this plot here, you can see that the real effective exchange rate is higher for the Philippines. And again, a higher number means appreciation, and a lower number means depreciation. Everyone else had a lower real effective exchange rate, which means their currency is weaker, and which will make their products more attractive to the export market. Okay, so we talked about import substitution as a form of structural transformation, right? So what is structural transformation? What is structural transformation? This is the transformation of the domestic economic structure from agriculture to a more urban manufacturing and ultimately a service also economy, right? It could come from two broad avenues. First, higher productivity in some sectors, manufacturing sectors, takes more inputs and will grow faster. These high productivity sectors will grow faster and will employ more inputs. So consider a simple model where you have a low productivity, low wage, large, high employment agri sector. And at the same time, you have a high wage, but a smaller manufacturing sector. Okay, so labor moves to industry and productivity is rising through the reinvestment of profits. Right. So as this process happens, labor moves to industry, takes advantage of the high wage rate. There's tendency for manufacturing wages to fall because of that, the allocation, but then productivity is rising through reinvestment of profits, which allows to maintain that higher wage rate, right? Which makes entry into manufacturing continually attractive, right? And this means that manufacturing as a share of GDP will continue to grow, and agriculture, it starts off with a large share, will tend to fall over time. And yes, I just wanted to read this. Higher productivity leads to continued expansion of the manufacturing sector. There's limited wage growth due to the size of the surplus labor in agriculture and the ability of manufacturing to employ this surplus labor through reinvestment of profits. The second basic way that structural transformation can happen is also through demand. As income rises, the quality and type of products demanded shifts towards higher quality products and services. So we'll tend to buy higher quality manufacturing, higher quality services, which will tend to raise the demand for these products and will again tend to raise the wages, which will attract workers, expand these industries relative to other industries where as income rises, demand will relatively fall, right? Such as agricultural goods or food, specifically, or beverages, right? That has a tendency as a share of the total budget to fall as the average income goes down, as average income goes up. Other sources of the structural change, as mentioned by Ducanes and Fabella later on, I'll show some plots, can also be the real exchange rate. And we talked about how our real exchange rate is appreciating, which means we have a bias against selling tradables, right? So in this case, we will tend to have a smaller manufacturing or smaller tradable sector because of our appreciated real exchange rate. One of the big questions in broader terms in development econ is whether manufacturing can still continue to play this role to have this higher wage, to be able to employ lots of labor, to enjoy increasing productivity through reinvestment of profits. Okay. Here is an article from Danny Roderick. It's a short article, so I invite all of you to read it. And one of the key paragraphs is quoted here. The trouble is that manufacturing industries are no longer labor-absorbing sectors they once were. A combination of factors, particularly the increased skill and capital intensity of modern manufacturing methods, stiff international competition to join GVCs, has made it difficult for developing economies to increase employment in formal manufacturing. Inevitable consequence of these trends is the bulk of the better jobs will have to be generated in services both in developing and developed countries. Since most services in developing countries, that is the Philippines included, are highly unproductive and informal, this shift poses a major challenge. Making matters worse, most governments are unaccustomed to thinking of service sectors as growth engines. Growth policies, whether they relate to research and development, governance, industrial policies, typically target these large manufacturing firms that compete in world markets, precisely because of the structural change history that has happened in the 60s and the 70s, which really had manufacturing as that engine that had higher productivity, higher wages, was able to absorb a lot of the surplus labor from agriculture. And finally, I'd like to present some plots from that Ducanes and Fabella paper, Development Progeria. So the idea here is that the Philippines has been turning basically into an economy that looks like a developed country economy, but without the actual development of the manufacturing base. So here you've got services, which is a very high share of output. Agriculture is the diamond, which is here. It's falling. Okay. Manufacturing is very, very small. Industry is constant, but it's falling, right? And here's the three shares of manufacturing, industry, and then services, wherein we tend to look more like the United States and Germany. Look at the Philippines here, wherein the services is this large share of GDP compared to Thailand, Indonesia, for example, which have a larger share of industry and manufacturing relative to services. And this basically also talks about the same thing that Danny Rodriguez talked about, and that our structural transformation is now quite reliant on services jobs. And the fact that we have to not just use manufacturing as a way to increase our growth and encourage manufacturing jobs, but also we have to find and develop higher quality service jobs for the Filipino people as well. These are not trivial issues. It's not easy to think about how to do it in practice. But these are ultimately the major ideas, and every analysis of the growth situation of the Philippines and many developing countries in the world have basically focused on the fact that we do have to have this dual growth strategy now in terms of developing both the manufacturing sector and understanding that manufacturing is no longer the same as before, that's been able to absorb a lot of excess labor. But we also need to develop high quality exportable services. And I'd like to end with that because going back to if I can go back to the benefits of export-led growth, this is totally correct that we need to earn foreign exchange. We need to attract investment into the country. And that is how both investment into the country, exports, both tend to increase G or efficiency, and both will tend to also increase your foreign exchange and your ability and the stability of the Philippine financial system, and the ability to import things that are necessary for economic growth, the things that we cannot necessarily produce domestically, that we need foreign exchange for. Okay. And foreign capital we need to come in to help develop the Philippines. So a lot of these things are the major thrusts of development policy, and I hope you guys are encouraged to read more details into all of this, like the history of ISI and how export-oriented development is still important, even though now we need to rely on both manufacturing and services to make that export-led growth happen. All right, with that, I'll see you guys next year. Thank you.